Okay, good evening, students. As we had discussed, today we're going to start with the first chapter, that is unit number 6, and the chapter is going to be reproduction in organisms. Now, as I had discussed a basic overview of our entire syllabus, I had said that in this particular chapter, we are going to learn about some of the basic terminology, concepts, and some of the processes that is actually involved in the process of reproduction, it is sexual or asexual. Now we'll also be talking about a process called vegetative propagation. Now some of these terms you have been already learning about, you have learned about it in the class 10th, but again, if you do not know, today we are going to have a basic and a detailed overview of the entire concepts. Now to start with, what do you mean by reproduction and what do you mean by lifespan? These are the two terms that we have to be very clear about, because to start with, reproduction is the biological process that which an organism gives rise through which an organism gives rise to the young offsprings similar to itself. So by this process of reproduction, what happens, a parent organism give rise to a daughter organism or daughter cell, we can say, and which is more or less like that of the parent organism. Now similarly, it enables the continuity of the species generation after generation, because this reproduction process is the only thing that is actually connecting one generation to the next generation. The process of reproduction in any particular organism depends on mainly many factors, but mainly we can say it is the organism's habitat, its internal physiology, and many other environmental factors and several other factors that are associated with the process. But definitely the organism's habitat is one of the key factor, and along with the physiology of the organism, that depends or that is going to determine the process of reproduction in any particular organism. Please respond if the audio is good enough. If any problem, please let me know through the chat. So what do you mean by lifespan? Now lifespan is the period of birth to the period of natural death of an organism. Now when I say death, I'm talking about a word, I'm using a word that is natural death. Now this is not the death by accident, we cannot say that is a lifespan, but right from the time of birth, if the organism, whatever time it is living and naturally dying, we call aging, right, natural death, that lifespan, that time frame, that is called the lifespan of that particular organism. Now when we talk about lifespan, we also need to see what are some of the most short-lived organisms and what are the most long-lived organisms. So here you can see the organism that is going to be the mayfly. This is an organism insect which is going to have a lifespan of only 24 hours or a single day. On the other hand, we also have the tortoise, which can live around 100 to 150 years, and also we have the banyan tree, which is going to live around 200 years. Now what I've done, I have left out some of these. So what I want you to do is you have to find out what are the lifespan for these different organisms. But again, you can see here the butterfly lives for around 1 to 2 weeks, crow for 15 years, crocodile for 60 years. Similarly, the man 100 years, approximately 80 to 100 years, right? So the lifespan of the organism again depends on the genetic constitution of the organism and the environment that is going to be it living with. Now, how do we differentiate? We all know that the reproduction is of two types, that is going to be asexual mode and sexual mode, and we all know, everybody knows about the difference, major difference that we talk about, that is asexual, we have a single parent involved, whereas in the sexual mode they are having two parents involved, that is one male and one female. Now similarly, let us talk about some other differences here. A single parent cell or a vegetative body part of a single parent is involved in case of asexual mode of reproduction. A single cell or vegetative part we are talking about. Now similarly, in the sexual reproduction, we are going to have the involvement of specialized cells that we know, we call it the gametes. Now the gametes are typically developed by specialized organs called gonads. Now the gonads are present only with the sexually reproducing organisms, and again these gonads are absent in the asexually reproducing organisms. Now again, there are two separate gametes that are produced in case of the sexually reproducing organisms, you all know that is the male and the female. So they produce the male and female gametes respectively, and we all know that these male and female gametes are developed from typical somatic cells. Now the somatic cells are nothing but the body cells or the regular cells of the body. Now these regular cells or somatic cells or the body cells, they undergo a special type of cell division that we typically refer to as the meiotic cell division, or also known as reductional cell division. So in case of sexual reproduction, you have the process meiotic cell division that is involved, whereas in case of asexual reproduction, it is only mitotic or the equational cell division, and there is no reductional cell division or meiotic cell division. Now I hope you all remember the concept of meiosis and mitosis from class 11th. Now if you do not, please, you have to read it up. You should know the basics, at least what happens in each. So in mitosis, equational cell division, there is no reduction in the number of chromosome, whereas in meiotic cell division there is a reduction in the chromosome number. So as a result of that, the gametes here are going to be haploid in nature, and here and the regular cells are going to be, or the somatic cells are going to be diploid in nature. That we have to keep in mind. Now the next point of difference in sexual and asexual reproduction is, in asexual reproduction, the offsprings that are produced are genetically identical, genetically similar, so we can call them as a clone. Clone of what? Clone of the parent organism. So there is no genetic recombination. We can call it a process of, we can call this or offsprings as the clones. Now on the other hand, the offsprings in sexual reproduction, they are not genetically identical with their parents. There are differences. There are differences at the genetic level, not at the morphological level, genetic level especially, and because mainly because we are having the exchange of genetic materials. Now in case of asexual reproduction, again the last point of difference we can see here is there is no variation involved. There is no variation, and that's why they are having less importance in terms of evolutionary processes. Now similarly, in case of sexual reproduction, we are having the variation, and variation happens because of exchange of gases. Now exchange of genes. And if you remember in class 11th, you have learned about it in the meiosis, prophase 1, right, crossing over. So that process gives rise to the variations, and that is a very important key factor in terms of the evolutionary processes. In class 10th also you have learned about variation, its importance in one of the chapter. I hope you remember that. If not, you need to learn it again. Now let us talk about the asexual reproduction. Okay, now I'll pause for a minute. Is the audio good enough? Please reply. Is the audio good enough? If not, let me know. Okay, anyway, so let's talk about the asexual mode of reproduction. Now in this, we are going to learn about first the advantages and some of the disadvantages of the asexual mode of reproduction. Now the asexual reproduction mode of reproduction, it is beneficial to the organisms or the animals that remain in one particular place, that is sessile animals like that of the hydra, planaria, right, and other animals that are typically unable to look for the mates with the opposite sex, we can typically call it. Now it also produces numerous offsprings without costing the parent a great amount of energy or time. So these are some of the advantages of the asexual mode of reproduction. Now there's again disadvantages involved with this. The disadvantages being it lacks genetic variation, and it is going to, if the stable environment changes, then the consequences could be deadly to all the individuals. Now again, this is something that you have learned in class 10th. Now why there was a question in class 10th, I hope you may not be remembering. If you remember, well and good. There was a question in class 10th that talks about the importance of variations. Now this is what it talks about. Now it lacks genetic variation, that's why it is more prone to extinction if the stable environment changes. Okay, so that is one thing that you have to keep in mind. Now we are going to the next particular slide. Now here you can see that the binary fission, it is one type of the mode of reproduction. The binary fission, it is a process the cells divide into halves. Now two halves, typically equal halves, and each half develops into an adult. Typically we see this in case of amoeba, paramecium. Okay, now there are these three pictures that I'm going to show you now. Now the first one is going to be the typical amoeba, in which the amoeba divides into two cells by simple binary fission. Second one I'm going to show you, I am showing it here is the paramecium, and third one is of the leishmania. Now the first one is an irregular binary fission. Okay, irregular binary fission. Second one is transverse binary fission, and third one is the longitudinal binary fission. Now simply it is the plane in which things are dividing, the organisms are dividing. As you can see here, here there is no plane in amoeba, it is simply irregular. In the second case, it is basically dividing the organism in a transverse at this particular point. You can see here at this particular point the organism is going to divide in a transverse manner, and in the third one it is in the longitudinal manner. Longitudinal means from this particular plane, as you can see in the pointer, this particular plane. So here it is of amoeba, the second one is of the paramecium, and the third one is of the leishmania. Now similarly we talk about the multiple fission. Here multiple fission, what happens, you are having an organism, for example this is again of the amoeba, let us say. You are going to have the nucleus, cytoplasm, and it actually sorry, this labeling is not proper, this labeling is the outermost labeling, that is the cyst wall it forms. And when the cyst wall forms, the inside what happens is the free nuclear division. Each of the nucleus divides number of times mitotically, and once that divides mitotically, it also gets at some point of time, it also start getting surrounded by the nucleus. Each of the nucleus gets surrounded by some amount of cytoplasm, and then when the favorable condition is back, what happens is the cyst wall is broken and each of the daughter cells are actually released. Okay, now okay, what is mate? Okay, so once again, yes, I will answer that. So here mate means an opposite sex, as I was talking about. In case of typically sexual reproduction, mate means a male and female, both of these are called the mates. Okay, so let us continue. So here multiple fission, again another image I'm going to show you. So what happens here is, here you have the amoeba. So when unfavorable condition comes, it typically goes for the spore formation and a process called encystation. Now when you have a unfavorable condition in for the amoeba, what happens is this particular membrane is going to withdraw all the pseudopodia. The pseudopodia is going to be withdrawn, and also the nuclear membranes start disintegrating and the nucleus start dividing. Now once the nucleus start dividing, it gets surrounded by some of the cytoplasm from the cell, and it formed a thick wall outside it, and we call it the spore. Now once the spore is formed, when the favorable condition is back, what happens is this particular wall, this cyst wall is actually broken. Okay, the cyst wall formation process is called encystation, and the cyst wall is broken and thereby releasing the spores. Now the spores here, they are again we are having a spore case which actually breaks open, and then the young amoeba is going to develop. It is going to develop into a young amoeba. Now here is a similar process how the cyst is going to develop. The typical the cyst is going to be of 3 layered, okay, not a single layer, but instead it is going to be 3 layered, because see, it has to protect the organism in an extremely vulnerable condition, in an unfavorable condition. So typical that thick. Okay, so here there are 3 layered cyst wall, and inside that only you are going to have the organism that is going to be the amoeba. And you can see here that a single nucleus divides into a number of daughter nuclei formation, and then each of the nuclei gets surrounded by cytoplasm, and that cells, that structures is called pseudopodiospores. Okay, they are called pseudopodiospores, and when you have the rupture of the cyst wall, the pseudopodiospores come out, they are released, and they form the young amoeba, or they develop into the young amoeba. Now as I said, just a text of that, what is encystation? Under unfavorable condition, the amoeba withdraws its pseudopodia and secretes a 3-layered hard covering or cyst wall around itself. That is called encystation. Now when the favorable condition returns, the encystation or this encysted amoeba, it divides into multiple divides by multiple fission and produce many minute amoeba or pseudopodiospores. Okay, just what we discussed. Now the pseudopodiospores, as we are talking about, by multiple fission, And finally, the cyst wall bursts out and the spores are liberated in the surrounding medium to grow up into many amoebas. The spore remains inactive during the unfavorable condition, and upon arrival of favorable condition, the cyst hatches and develop into an adult. Similarly, the sporulation is thus not only a mean of reproduction but also enables the organism, that is amoeba like organisms, to survive during unfavorable conditions and disperse to new localities with air. I hope we are clear with the process of sporulation and multiple fission with the help of example of the amoeba. If you have any doubts, you can always ask. Okay, there's a question by somebody. Do amoeba reproduce both by binary fission and multiple fission? Yes, depending on the condition. Typically they go for amoeba, typically go binary fission when they are under favorable condition, and when they are under unfavorable condition, they follow the sporulation process and they have to undergo the multiple fission with them. I hope that is clear. Somebody logged in by the name Raghunath. Okay, Raghunath Dhala. Next one is the spore formation in fungi. Now this is also a regular process. We all know the spore is formed in case of fungi by a structure called sporangium. Now sporangiums are the specialized structure, and they are joined by the structure called columella, and they are borne on specialized hyphae called the sporangiophore. Now again, this is something that you have learned in class 11th. Sporangiophore is the specialized hyphae that actually holds the sporangium, and sporangium develop the spores. Now again, as somebody was asking somebody was asking regarding the fission process in amoeba, there is both binary and multiple fission in amoeba. Now when a fully grown amoeba in a typical process, the amoeba retracts pseudopodia and the nucleus divides by mitosis, and daughter nucleus separate and cytoplasm constrict, and two amoeba cells are formed. That is when the organism is in a typical process, sorry for the background noise, corona, this thing. Anyways, so when they are under favorable condition, they go for this binary fission, and when they are under unfavorable condition, they go for the multiple fission. Right, the amoeba pulls in the pseudopodia again, and it forms a cyst wall, and the cyst wall allows the amoeba cells to develop mitotically inside, and when it is ruptures, it produces number of this pseudopodiospores and again daughter amoebas, as we talked about earlier. Now how to differentiate fission with fission, that is binary fission with the multiple fission. Now binary fission means division of parent cells into two smaller nearly equal sized identical daughter individuals, and here the parent cells does not break away. Now as you can see here in the image, it is a binary fission. Now on the right side, multiple fission, parent cells into several small nearly equal sized daughter individuals are formed, and the parent cells typically break away, releasing many individuals at once. So here you can see plasmodium and the nucleus. We already have seen this. The cyst actually breaks down, the parent cell organism breaks down, and it is going to release all the daughter nuclei at the same time. Now coming to the budding part, the budding here, we all know it typically happens in yeast or hydra. In yeast, we all know it's a eukaryotic cells having a single unicellular eukaryotic cell, probably only one. And here you can see how the small bud is formed, or the nucleus divides. That is always what happens is karyokinesis occurs, and that is going to divide into the cytokinesis. So thereby first the bud is formed, and then it actually divides again and again to form number of daughter yeast, that is going to form through a chain of yeast cells are going to be formed. Now on the right side, what you're seeing here is the is the hydra. Now you have a parent hydra, a small bud develops, and the bud start growing on the parents, and finally it gets separated completely from the parent body. So in this case, a simple process, the organism develops on the parent body till it is fully mature and then released from the parent body. It is typically seen both in case of yeast and hydra, a basic example. Now you have some other process, that is uniparental. Here what happens is a person receives two copies, organism receives two copies of a chromosome or part of the chromosome from a single parent, and no copy is from the other. So here the organism or the parent individual receives everything from a single parent, not the second parent. Nothing comes from the second parent. So that particular condition is called uniparental condition. Now there are two more concepts, that is fragmentation and regeneration. We all know about it. You have learned in class 8 or 7th, 8th, or sometimes again in class 10th also you have learned. So fragmentation process is asexual reproduction, where organisms matures, grows, fragments themselves into a number of pieces, a number of fragments, and each fragment then develop into a mature or fully grown individual following the mitosis, followed by mitosis. Typically it occurs in Spirogyra, a typical example. Also in some of the fungi, some of the annelids, some of the sea stars. Okay. Regeneration again is a process of renewal, restoration, and growth. Now both of these are not same, they are different, they are related, but they are definitely not the same. It occurs at the level of cells, tissue, or organs. It is common in case of Hydra, Planarian, tapeworm, and echinoderms. For example, a lizard can discard a part of the tail when in danger, and the tail can regenerate later. Right, the organism can regenerate the tail at a later point of time. Right, typically if you have tried ever holding a lizard, probably you cannot. If you typically hold the tail part will be with you, but the organism goes away. Because the organism can regrow, so that lost part is not an issue for the lizard. In humans too, the liver cells can regenerate if it is partially damaged. So here just image, as you can see here, this is Spirogyra. If the Spirogyra splits into 3 or more fragments, each of the fragment have the capability to actually regrow into the entire organism, entire Spirogyra here. Similarly, in case of regeneration, what happens if I cut, see if I intentionally also if I cut Planaria or Hydra, for example, into a number of pieces, then in each of the piece have the ability to regrow into entire organism. See here the entire here each of the broken Hydra part may or may not regrow, but typically in case of fragmentation, if the fragment have the ability to regrow to the entire organism. Okay, there are a few questions. Just I'll come back to this. I'm a little bit difficult in seeing both, so I'll just come back and answer some of the questions for everybody. Fragmentation and regeneration. So in fragmentation, organisms that are fragmented results in each fragments growing into an individual organism. But in regeneration, it typically occurs when an organism need to regrow certain body parts. So fragmentation is a regular process of asexual reproduction, but regeneration, typically we cannot strictly say it is a asexual mode of reproduction. It is typically required as and when there is a need to regrow, there is a requirement to regrow certain body parts. But refragmentation is a regular process of asexual reproduction, as you have discussed. Now there are some more examples of asexual reproductive structures, right? So the first one here is zoospores. Okay, these are the flagella. There are two flagella. These are the zoospores that are released by the Chlamydomonas. This is again an organism that you have learned in class 9. Chlamydomonas, zoospores. Now and the second on the right hand side, the B is a conidia. Penicillium, you might be knowing about the antibiotics Penicillium notatum. The first antibiotics were actually discovered from it was extracted from Penicillium. It is a fungus, and it reproduces asexually through the formation of these specialized structures called the conidia. Again, the conidia is formed in a chain, in a bud chain structure that is called chain of conidia. Each of the conidia have the ability to regrow into the entire Penicillium. Now the next one is going to be the buds. We already talked about budding in Hydra. This image is taken from your textbook. Now the next one is the gimmule in sponges. See again here in the inside. See, you can see this particular part. Now this particular part is actually the spores. Okay, this particular part. So this particular part, as I am highlighting, this is the part that is actually the spores which are produced endogenously, and the structure that is outside that, these structures are typically the spicules. If I talk about this particular structure, these are the spicules. Okay, so these spicules help in the maintaining the particular. It's like an endoskeleton. Okay, remember this is like a endoskeleton. So this is typically seen in case of sponges. Now you will learn in higher class or later on, there are two type of this again the structure can form, spores can form endogenous and exogenous. Now moving forward, here we have the potato. Okay, potato, again we know they have the structures called the eyes, and these eyes have the ability to germinate into the entire organism. Similarly, rhizome in case of gingers also have the buds, they develop from the nodes. And the third one here, the picture is going to be bulbil. This is typically seen in case of agave. And here you have the bryophyllum. We know that the leaf margins have the ability to regrow to the entire plant. They have the adventitious buds at the margins. And the last one here is the offsets. These are typical, the connecting structure. These are called the offsets that we typically see in case of water hyacinth. Remember, dear students, that this particular diagram and this particular one and this particular diagrams are very important in terms of board examination. Many a times they ask diagram based question. They'll ask you to identify why do you see this. Okay, this kind of question they ask. So please have a look at this. Now, Iconia, this typical plant you might, this typical weed actually, you would have seen in some of the water body near your locality. Now, it's very important to understand the mechanism of this particular growth of this particular plant. Now, this particular plant, it is one of the most invasive weed, one of the most deadly weed that we find in our area, in our locality. Now, in standing water, this particular weed, that is Iconia crassipus, that is the scientific name or common name called water hyacinth, also known as the nicknamed as terror of Bengal. It basically can grow very rapidly in a water body and it can drain out oxygen from the water. That will lead to basically suffocation of the organisms, aquatic organisms in the water, because they will not get enough of oxygen. Typically, it leads to the death of the organism, including the fishes. Now, typically, if they grow at such a rapid pace that we have difficulty in removing it. Like they have the ability to grow very quickly, then we have the ability to remove them. That's why again there's a story behind why it is called terror of Bengal, and you'll be learning about this at a later point of time. Again, as you have learned, this typical organism, the plant, that weed typically reproduces asexually with the help of the structure called offsets. Okay, now there are few more structures, few more asexual reproductive structures that you have to know about. One of that is called the runner or stolons. Now, in some plants, some cases, like for example grasses, you have what happens in gladiolus. What happens is this particular one is the main plant, so they grow, but there is one particular structure that typically it can go from one particular place and goes to the second place, and here it again can form the structure that is called the second bud that can grow into the entire plant. And this connection is called the stolon or the runners. Now, typically you would have seen this in case of grasses. When you pull one grass out in the fields, when you typically pull one grass out, you'll see a chain of grasses that actually gets pulled out, and each of them have a tuft of root, the aerial parts, and then this connecting structure stolon, and again you have the second grass structure. So these structures are called the stolon or the runners. Now, on the right side, what you see here is a strawberry. And now the strawberry also have the runner, the stolons, and you can see here these are roots, and this particular structure that connects, and you can see here is a separate or the second strawberry plant that is developing. Here is a third strawberry plant that is developing, and the origin is from a single parent, original strawberry plant that is connected to the structure that develops these structures through this runners or stolons. Now you have the second, something similar, similar to the stolons, this runners of the stolons, that is called the suckers. And typically we have the suckers in case of chrysanthemum, and also you have this in case of the tomato. Now what happens here is this suckers typically they grow underground. In the previous one you have seen this typically is on the top of the soil, but here they're growing underground. They grow into a second plant, and these also play one of the method by which vegetative method by which the organism is growing. So these are what I am talking about. These are different methods of vegetative propagation. These are the vegetative propagation. We all know that by cutting, grafting, right? We can always stem cutting. We can always grow the plants, and that's why these structures, these vegetative parts, these structures, something different from the flowers. Different from the seeds that is being used for growing or propagating the plant. That's why these are called vegetative propagation. This method is called vegetative propagation, and all the plants that are part of this are called the vegetative propagules. Now here one more, there is the bulb. We all know that we see typically in case of onion, garlic, tulips, hyacinth, lily. Okay, so you all know about it. Now the nodes. Now we know about the plants and the ginger. Okay, so why I'm giving emphasis to the nodes? Because when we talk about these vegetative propagules, and most of the places you will be seeing these are the modified stems. And when we talk about the stem, we all know there are nodes and there are internodes. Internodes are typically the space between two nodes, and these nodes are very important because these structures that actually give rise to the new branches. You know, you have learned in class 11 that the nodes are responsible for giving rise to the new branches. So similarly here, when we are talking about the vegetative propagules, we are actually talking about nothing but the nodes when we talk about the places from which new organisms are arising. So here you can see this is the place where you have the nodes. These are the scaly leaves, these are the nodes area, and from these nodes you are going to have the new bud that is going to appear. Similarly here also eyes, the eyes of the potato, the tuber is nothing but the nodes of the modified stem. Now to give an idea, the small plants emerging from the bulb, that is called the eyes of the potato tuber, from the rhizomes of the banana or the gingers, right? Where do they emerge from? That's the question. Where do they emerge from? Now they typically arise from the nodes present in the modified stems of these plants. The modified stems have the nodes, and from these nodes these particular plants emerge. When the nodes come in contact with the damp soil or water, they produce roots and new plants. Similarly, adventitious buds also arise from the notches present at the margins of the leaves of the bryophyllum. This ability is fully exploited by the gardeners and the farmers for the commercial propagation of such plants. Right, that is called the process of vegetative propagation. I think I have been clear with these things. Okay, so this ends the asexual reproduction and the vegetative propagation seen in the organisms. Now we can talk about the reproduction in sexual reproduction if you are interested. And first, before that, I'll just give you I'll give answer to the question that I have been asked. Jyoti, is the protective sheath important in multiple fission? Yes, Jyoti. Typically, if the organism is going through unfavorable condition, in that case, the multiple fission should have the typically have the protective sheath. Again, it is specific to the organism. It is not seen in all the organisms. Asutosh, sir, what is the cyst wall is made up of? Cyst wall is made up of some of the biochemicals that are typically resistant to degradation by high temperature, high moisture content, or pH typically. Next one, somebody is asking, what is the difference between fragmentation and budding? Okay, fragmentation is completely different. Fragmentation, you have the organism grows and breaks itself into number of fragments, and then only it is going to, as you can see here, I'll just go back for the sake of this particular question. Now let me go back. I can see here the entire organism, the fragment, the mature organism, it makes itself into number of fragments. Then each of the fragment grows into the mature organism. Budding, on the other hand, is completely different. Budding, what happens? You have the parental organism. In the parental organism, you have a daughter cell that start, a daughter cell or daughter organism that will start developing, right? And this organism develop till the time it is not fully developed, fully mature. And once it is fully developed, only then it is going to separate itself from the parent plant, parent organism. In case of fragmentation, it is completely different. They are broken from the beginning, and each of the fragmented part goes into the entire organism. Now, with this, sir, can amoeba, which is formed from binary fission, undergo multiple fission? Yes, definitely. Or else, how do you expect them to undergo multiple fission? Whatever is forming from the binary fission under the circumstance of unfavorable condition, they can undergo multiple fission. Sir, what is I don't understand the question. Anyway, Asutosh, what is common name of water hyacinth? Water hyacinth is the common name, Asutosh. Iconia crassibus is the scientific name, as I told you. Iconia crassibus is the scientific name. Okay, and water hyacinth is the common name, as you can see here. Biswaranjan, I think formation number depends upon seasons. Why, sir? Okay, not exactly formation of nodes depend upon the seasons. There is no. I don't understand your question. Formation nodes. Are you sure about the question? What is bulbil and how it grows? Okay, bulbil is similar to that of the bulb, slightly different. And in the bulb, you have the modified stem and you have the what you call scaly leaves which are surrounding it. Bulbil is slightly different. It grows typical. It grows similar to that of the bulb only, like the onion. Okay. Uh, is it related to the morphology of plants? Yes, somebody is asking Mudduli, I guess. Somebody, I don't understand the question. Mudduli, somebody, I'm not able to understand the question. Is fragmentation acts on Spirogyra? Okay, I'll reframe the question. Is fragmentation acts on Spirogyra? I would say that the Spirogyra actually follows the method of fragmentation for the sake of asexual mode of reproduction. Okay, fragmentation is something that is going to be followed by the organism, that is in this case a Spirogyra, for it to multiply through asexual mode of reproduction. Okay. Yeah, so dear students, should we continue with the sexual mode of reproduction here? If you say here, if you say okay, then I'll continue. There's like 3-4 more slides. Okay, if you say, I'll just continue. Please reply. Should we continue? It will take around 10 more minutes. Is that okay? That means we can continue. Okay then. Yeah, let us begin. So, when we talk about sexual mode of reproduction, we already know that the organisms, we already discussed in the beginning, that the organism must have two partners or two mates of opposite sex, that is one male and one female. And when we talk about sexual reproduction, the organisms typically follow certain phases of growth. Well, this is followed by every organism that follows sexual mode of reproduction. And the first stage is called the juvenile phase and also known as the vegetative phase. Now, the juvenile phase is typically the word that we use in case of animal, whereas the vegetative phase is the word that we typically use in case of the plants. Right. Now, what is this stage? This is stage of growth and maturity before the organism is ready for sexual reproduction. So before reproduction begins, sexual reproduction begins, the stage, the development, the maturity till then, that is called the juvenile phase or the vegetative phase. Now, the second stage in these organisms is called reproductive phase, and that is basically the beginning of the reproduction, and that is the end of the juvenile or vegetative phase. Now, the third stage obviously is going to be the senescence or the old age, or we also known as the aging, and this typically ends the reproductive age or the reproductive phase. And here what happens is the rate of metabolism typically slows down, and it typically leads to the death of the organism, let it be plant or animal. Now, what happens here, as the metabolism is going to slow down, the cells will not be able to behave or respond in a proper manner, grow in a proper manner. And if the cells, we all know through the cell theory, the cells are very important, and until the cell actually having a proper metabolism rate, it will not going to support the organism. So when the rate of metabolism slows down in the organism, the final stage, that is the senescence or the old age or the aging, creeps in. Finally the organisms dies. And the hormones, we all know the hormones are the chemical messengers released by the glands, and these hormones play a very important role for the transmission or transition between from one stage to the next So hormones are very important for the transition between these stages of growth. Now, when we talk about the growth pattern of the plants, typically we have three growth pattern of the plants. We all know that there are some plants that are typically seasonal. For example, mango, we get the fruits only at a particular season, typically in the summer, not every time. Now, there are some other where we can get the fruiting and flowering at almost in a continuous manner. So typically, if you want to learn the growth pattern of the plants, we can divide them into three different parts, three different categories. One is called annual, second is called biennial, and third is called perennial. I hope many of you might be knowing about it, but just to give you a recap, I'm just talking about this. Now, when you talk about annual plants, these plants have a full life cycle, that is from seed. Seed will germinate, grow, develop, flower, seed development, fruits, and till the seed is formed. That is seed to seed cycle. It typically gets over in a single 1 year. Okay, in a single year. Now it will germinate, bloom, and die in a particular year only. Typically does not go to the next year. Now one of the examples is the French marigold. Now the biennial is a condition where you have the plants that takes typically 2 years to complete its life cycle, and it will germinate, grow, survive through one winter, and in the second year it will typically grow more, bloom, and then finally die. Now in the third case, perennial plants are typically, biennials are typically very rare, not so common. Annual and perennials are very common. Now the perennial plants, you see many of them here. For example, bamboo, apple, banana, daisy, poppy plant. Now in these plants, they typically live for more than 2 years. That is typically 3 years or more. And it is typically difficult to clearly define the phases in them. Right? What phases? The vegetative phase, and the reproductive phase. Typically, we cannot identify in case of the perennial plants. Now, there are certain plants which do not follow this pattern. So, typically, as we are talking about till now, that every plant have typically they go through this vegetative phase, reproductive, and senescence. And in the reproductive phase, typically the plants would flower and produce the fruits, which will contain the seed, and the seed can regrow again. But there are certain plants, and these plants, they do not follow the typical flowering phenomenon or flowering patterns, and they have a very unusual flowering phenomenon. Now one of that is going to be the bamboo. Typically they flower only once in their entire lifetime, and it is typically after 50 to 100 years. And during this time, after 50 to 100 years, they produce a large number of fruits, and they typically die. Now the second example is going to be another very unique plant, that is going to be the Strobilanthes kunthiana, that is Nilkuranji, and that typically flowers once in every 12 years. Okay, there are certain places in Kerala that it grows, and the last time it grows was in the last year, actually in the September month, if I'm right. September 2019 was one of the time when it actually bloomed. So now these two are very important again from the point of view of the examinations. So the bamboo typically flowers every 50 to 100 times and then produce large number of fruits and die. And the Strobilanthes kunthiana, scientific name, and the common name is going to be the Nilkuranji, and that is going to flower every 12 years, and then they actually stop blooming. So these are not going to follow the regular flowering patterns, and these are something that is unusual and typically asked in the examinations also. So with that, we are going to stop today, and the remaining things we can continue tomorrow if you agree for it. Okay, I'll go through some questions, and if you have any more questions, you can always put it in the comment box. Okay, live chat. Okay, so somebody, Mudali, somebody is asking, what is the replacement for hormones in plants? Okay, dear students, there is no replacement for hormones in plants. Plants do have plant hormones, or PGRs it is called, plant growth regulators. Now you might be knowing about the different hormones, that is auxin, cytokine, globulins. There are many more which are actually helping the development of the plants. Plants do have the plant growth hormones. As there are no glands in the plants, so no hormones. No, not exactly true. Plants release plant hormones. Yes, phytohormones it is called. Yes. Okay. So, dear students, do you have any more doubts? Why different plants exhibit different flowering phases? Okay. When you talk about flowering phase, this typically depends on the what you call the genetics of the organism, because every organism we know, every plant we know have different sort of genome, different sort of genetic makeup, and each of these plant respond to however the genetic makeup of the organism or the plant is actually. And so depending on the environment they are in, depending on the habitat they are in, depending on the evolutionary pattern how they have evolved and they are habituated to the environment, the what do you call, the flowering patterns or the flowering phases will be going to be dependent on that. Yeah. Who is using this account Moodily? I am not able to understand. Sorry, please. Who is account using the account Moodily? Vidisri, we will be talking about oestrus and menstrual cycle differently. We'll be talking about it probably. Give me a second. Yeah. So Vidisri, what is the difference between oestrus and menstrual cycle? Now we'll be talking about the difference in oestrus cycle, menstrual cycle tomorrow in the next session. There are a few more concepts that we'll be talking about tomorrow itself, and that time we're going to talk about that. Okay. Jyoti, I think are you asking uh, what is stabilization? I think is asking what is Jyoti. I don't understand your question. What is stabilization or stabilization? Okay. Money. In menstrual cycle, the organism does not allow copulation, but in menstrual cycle, organism cow allow copulation. Biswajan will be discussing about micropropagation. Yes, we can have a discussion tomorrow. I will add it to the thing tomorrow, to the child list tomorrow, to the list tomorrow. I'll talk about micropropagation. It's a technique that is typically you will be learning at a later point of time in a different chapter, but definitely we'll be talking about micropropagation at this point. So micropropagation basically what happens is it talks about the process of tissue culture. So tissue culture is typically when we take a small plant, a small part of the plant that is typically the X plant, and we grow the entire plant through a what do you call in vitro condition using hormones and nutrients. So that time we can actually use that. Okay, so that is we're going to talk about that in a chapter called biotechnology chapter. Okay, that's a chapter is there. We'll be talking about that. You talked about starvation. Okay, next one. I think give me a second again. Okay, who is this Muduli again? Yeah, again, whoever is a Muduli, who is the Muduli actually? Please give your name. Anyway, the person who is asking is somebody asking strawberryization. Okay, so that is a typical Nidarians. If you learned in class 11, there was basically two forms, two phases. That is called polyps and medusa. Okay, now the polyps and medusa, these two are different stages in case of Nidarians. Okay, so the polyps to medusa, so that particular process that is called the stabilization. Okay, give me a second. Police and Medusa. I hope you all remember Police and Medusa. Okay, anything else? Any other doubts? Uh, no, that is actually the police forming medusa. That is only called the stabilization. Okay. Yes, animal kingdom. Yes, yes, yes. That is what we had learned about it. Yes. Okay. Anything else? Any other? Okay, okay, okay. Fine, fine. No problem at all. You can attend the classes. No problem. You are welcome to attend the classes. Okay. Education, no problem. Education should not have limitations by school or anything. I am live. You want, you can join anytime you want. Okay. Anyway, so where are you from? Arti Kumari. Where are you from? Any other doubt, students? What is the next question? What is Morphallaxis? Okay, I'm not pretty sure about it, Vishwaranjan. I'm not very sure about the words, but what I know about, what I guess is the Morphallaxis basically it is a regeneration of certain particular tissue due to the loss of that existing tissue. Okay, this typically means the exchange of the tissue. So typically we see in case, I think we see this in case of the hydra we can see when we cut by a knife, the entire tissue grows, because that part which is lost, the particular part is lost, so that part is going to be regenerated, right? So that's why it is that is a word called the Morphallaxis, something similar to that. Yes, exchange of the tissue. And the other one, epimorphallaxis, I'm not pretty sure about it. I have to just find out. Okay, somebody's asking. Okay, somebody's asking, what is epimorphosis in regeneration? Okay, uh, okay, okay, I guess. So epimorphosis is basically the regeneration of a specific tissue or specific part of an organism, and it involves specialized cell, and there is an extensive cell proliferation. Okay, so there is an extensive cell proliferation of the body cells, also known the somatic cells, and then de-differentiation and reformation, and it also leads to something called the blastema formation. It's a type of it's a process of regeneration of certain specific part in the organism. Proliferation of any particular cut surface. Am I clear, Mr. Sabar? Okay, biennial and perennial. See, biennial typically, Mr. Meher. So, biennial typically what happens is you are going to have the plant live for typical 2 years. Okay, 2 years. So, in one season they grow, in the second season they bloom, they flower, they form the seeds, and they typically die by the second year. Perennial, on the other hand, they typically they grow for a longer period of time. That is typically more than 3 years. And in these plants, we cannot define exactly the flowering phases when what is going to happen. So that's a perennial plant. Most of the plants are perennial in this case. Okay, so those what are gonads? Gonads are basically the reproductive structures, reproductive units. Typically, for example, in case of male, it is the testis. In case of female, it is the ovary. So these are organs that actually give rise to the gametes. Okay, I think somebody is asking, maybe Dhala again is asking, what is agamogenesis? Okay, agamogenesis processes like your pathogenesis, apomixis, where typically the male gametes are not involved. That is called agamogenesis. Okay, that is the pathogenesis. You'll be learning about it at a later point of time. Pathogenesis and apomixis. Typically, male gametes are not involved. That is the process of agamogenesis. Okay. Mr. Dhala, are you clear? Anything else? Tomorrow time, I think we'll have it around 11 o'clock only, morning 11 o'clock. Um, Moduli, it is going to be around 11 o'clock. Ashutosh, how can we know organism's exact lifespan? Okay, typically not possible to know exact lifespan of an organism because every individual in the organism also going to have different sort of timing. We can always calculate an average lifespan. Okay. Okay, we're going to close for today. So tomorrow we'll be live, probably, most probably at around 11 o'clock. Okay, and that's all. And if there is any change in the this thing timing, I will let you know through the group. Okay, I think we should close it. It is almost a 1 hour session. Tomorrow we'll continue. Bye then. I'm going to end the stream. Lizards are both they follow sexual mode of reproduction only. They can regenerate, but they follow sexual mode of reproduction. Okay then. Thank you all for joining. Tomorrow again we can have it. Okay, at around 11 o'clock or so. So if there are any change in time, you will be notified accordingly. Okay then. Take care. Bye. I'm going to end the stream now. Bye, everybody.